Hello, hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third annual Monash Christian Union versus Monash Philosophy Society debate. It is good having you guys here. My name is Marnus. I'm a third year education and science student here in Monash, and I'm the outgoing president for Monash Christian Union.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kai. I used to be the secretary at the Monash Philosophy Society, and now I'm just having a good time. I'm in my third year as well. I'm studying maths and computer science, but I have a fondness for a lot of philosophy. And yeah, really quickly, I'd like to just pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nations as the original and ongoing custodians of the land, and pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging.
Thanks, Kai. Tonight, Kai and I will be running through the debate with you guys. So you guys can sit back, relax. We'll tell you the what, the why, and the when. So, firstly, what is this debate about? I hope you guys know because you turned up. But in case you just turned up today, the debate is, does Christianity or secularism better explain suffering? And we're going to hear from our Christian Union debaters taking the side that Christianity has a better explanation for suffering. And we'll also hear from the Philosophy Society debaters taking the side that secularism better explains suffering. Now, why a debate? Well, the reason for a debate is we want you all to discuss and engage in dialogue. We don't want this just to stay up the front, but we guys actually want you guys to think about it for yourself. Both the clubs here think it's a really important question, and we want to wrestle it out. So yes, it's a debate, but more so, it's an opportunity to foster discussion. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
And I would like to point out that even though right now you'll hear a lot of philosophers disagreeing with Christians and Christians disagreeing with philosophers, oftentimes we have a lot of people who agree with both. Maybe you agree with some points and disagree with others. And I might point out that a lot of the strongest Christian thinkers have a strong background in philosophy. And a lot of my favorite philosophers, which is the most important metric, have a lot of training in theology. I'm talking about people like Thomas Aquinas, Kierkegaard, Martin Luther. A lot of people who we respect, a lot of people who've had a lot of good ideas. And so, yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with these people over the past couple of years about who they are and what they do. So I'd like to really quickly ask some of the people from MCU what they're doing. So I'm going to ask you guys to say your names, what you're studying, and a quote that deeply resonates with you.
I'm Bella. Nice to meet you all. I'd love to chat to you afterwards. I am studying business and arts with majors in marketing and philosophy. And a quote that deeply resonates with me is a quote from Dumbledore, actually, where he says, it's not our abilities that make us who we are, but our choices.
Cool. My name is Salome. I am a first-year arts and law student with a major in history. And the quote that I have chosen is a C.S. Lewis quote, which is, what you see and hear depends a good deal on where you are standing.
Thanks. Thanks, Bella and Salome. Philosophy Society, who are you guys? What do you study? And yeah, a quote.
Hello, everyone. My name is Siming. I'm a third-year Bachelor of Arts student majoring in economics and philosophy. And my favorite quote comes from Socrates, which is, the unexamined life is not worth living.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm an alumnus. I studied literary studies here at Monash Clayton. Now I hang around the Debate Society as a volunteer coach and sometimes come to the Philosophy Society. The quote I've chosen is from an author named Terence. Homo sum hamani nihil ame alienem puto. I am a human being. I think nothing that is human is alien to me.
Thanks, guys. And look, I hope that was helpful for you to get to know our debaters more, and you'll get to know them more as they debate. before we start, we do need to do a bit of housekeeping. If you're looking for the toilet, just where you came in, just under the stairwell, and there you can find it. If you can use the doors at the back, then during the debate, that'd be great. So we don't use this front section here. Another thing we want to talk about is we just want you guys as an audience to be aware. You guys might want to cheer like it's the footy grand final. It's not. It's not. You guys may feel the sudden urge to jump up and pump your fist. I'm one of those people. But I do want to encourage us to respect the debaters who put a lot of time and effort into this, as well as the other audience members who want to listen and pay attention. Try and keep your excitement internal. Now, our moderator tonight will be Joash. He has plenty other debating experience and actually has moderated this very debate 2 years ago. So we'll now hand over to Joash to get us kicked off.
Thanks, guys. I echo their welcome, and it's so wonderful to see this room packed out. I think it really speaks to the interest that is in this topic, and I'm really excited for our debate tonight. As you know, the topic is, does Christianity or secularism better explain suffering? We are going to have opening statements start the night. So our speakers are going to go affirmative team, affirmative team, negative team. They're going to do opening statements for about 8.5 minutes. My job tonight is just to keep things on track. I'm going to try to speak as little as possible. I'm excited to see these guys have a clash of ideas. There may be times where the tangents I think are irritating to you. And if that happens, I'll call them back in, but otherwise we're going to let them go. So without further ado, we're going to call people up. I've given the speakers a heads up that they'll be timed, just so we keep on track. Later in the night, we're going to have rebuttal as well. I'll explain the rules when we get to there. So I'd love to invite Bella up from the MCU.
Am I on? Can everyone hear me? Yep. Awesome. Let's go. There are some terrible things that we experience in this world. Amidst the beauty and joy of life, there is brokenness and distress and death. You guys don't need me to explain to you what suffering is, what suffering looks like in this world. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, natural disasters, emotional, relational, or mental distress, pain, injustice. Today, we are not here to explain why each individual instance of suffering occurs, but we are going to show you how Christianity has the resources to think about and respond to suffering that secularism cannot compete with. Something inside of us knows that suffering is bad. We cry out against it. We search for answers. Why do these things happen? How to make sense of this world with such beauty and such brokenness? We believe that Christianity explains these things in a way that secularism cannot. Christianity provides comfort and hope where secularism cannot. And although Christianity doesn't completely remove this suffering and this gut-wrenching distress, it offers a framework and a model for how to explain suffering and how to respond to it. For these reasons today, we will be contending that Christianity provides a better explanation for suffering than secularism offers. Now, let's just briefly look at what is at stake in this debate. Well, we all experience suffering. This is a topic that matters on a deeply personal level to all of us. And today we'll present two worldviews. We believe that Christianity provides a better explanation. And people often think that Christianity doesn't have answers for these questions of suffering. But we're here to show you today that Christianity is not defeated by the problem of suffering. This worldview provides a comprehensive explanation for why we suffer and how to respond. My aims today are to outline our case, to present our first argument, and to compare it with our opposition. Today, we will show you that Christianity provides two crucial things that our opposition just cannot provide to the same extent: a better capacity to evaluate suffering and a better resource to respond to suffering. Now, suffering is a failure to flourish and the distress associated with that. Take the example of a fish. A fish is created to live in water. It has gills, it has fins, it has a tail. It was made to swim. and made to gain nutrients from the environment around it. And what happens when you take a fish out of water? It dies. It experiences extreme distress. It cannot flourish because it's not in the environment it was originally made for. Similarly, when we fail to flourish, we experience distress. Now, my argument is that Christianity provides the capacity to evaluate suffering that secularism cannot outmatch. For those who may not be familiar with what we as Christians believe, let me first summarize our Christian worldview. So Christians believe that in the beginning, a good God created the universe and he sustains the universe. Christians believe that humans rejected this God. Christians believe that God entered into our suffering in Jesus Christ, and this means that we have hope of a day when creation will be restored through Jesus. Now, the link between these first two is sometimes confusing, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. It is the key to the point that I will be making. So an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, good God created the universe and created humans. And this means two things. First, there is a created order to things. This provides an objective moral standard, the way things were meant to be. And why is this important? It tells us how the world should be. Like pathology, a doctor must know what health looks like to be able to identify what sickness looks like. In the same way, we cannot identify suffering if we do not know what flourishing looks like. Second, this means God being the creator and sustainer of the universe means that without God, creation would not be sustained. God is the giver of life. Without him, there is no life. And a third thing here, Christianity says that humans are made in God's image and called very good. That means all of you in this room. We are the center of creation. And so what we do affects all creation. This is how the world began. God created it, he sustains it, and we flourish because this is how we were meant to live. We are a fish in water. But when we humans rejected God and cut ourselves off from the creator and sustainer of life, this means that death enters the world. And along with it, suffering enters the world. We now live in a substandard condition, in a world of suffering and death. We are fish out of water. Now, let me stress here, we were never made to live like this. We were made to live in relationship with God. This is our purpose. The instances of death and suffering that we experience as a result of us living in this substandard condition are a result of us living in this substandard condition. We know we are made for something greater. Something within us longs for this. This is why we experience distress and outrage at suffering, and we should respond this way. This is even demonstrated in Jesus Christ when he came to earth. There's a story in the Bible about Jesus' friend Lazarus who died, and when Jesus got to the tomb, the Bible says that he wept. Now, later on, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. He had full power and authority to reverse this situation and make it well again. And so why did he weep? Well, the reason why Jesus wept is because he felt our anguish and distress at the fact that this world is not the way it was meant to be. The fact that death is a part of this world and it never was meant to be that way. The brokenness of the world, the suffering we experience in death, or the suffering other people experience in the death of someone. Death is the ultimate suffering, the ultimate failure to flourish by the ultimate failure to live. And this is what Jesus came to defeat. So this distress that we humans, even Jesus, feel at the presence of suffering in our lives is correct. This distress is right, it's rational, it's natural. We should feel distress. And Christianity explains why. Secularism does not. Now, I doubt that our opposition will disagree that suffering is bad or that it causes distress. This is something we all know to be true. Christianity can validate our emotional response to suffering, but secularism cannot. The reason Christianity can do this is because it provides an objective moral framework upon which the capacity to evaluate suffering and upon which we can evaluate suffering as something that is morally bad. Now, secularism does not have an objective moral framework on which to establish that suffering is bad. Secularism can tell you suffering is bad, but it cannot provide a logical basis for this. It cannot show you why. If there is no standard for good, how can you say that suffering is not good? If there is no purpose for us as humans, how can we say that suffering is against our purpose? If there is no created order to the universe, how can we justify this feeling that we all have that suffering is somehow not right, not good, not what we were made for? Under secularism, this natural human response is not validated. Whether suffering is a necessary product of evolution or an unfortunate and unnecessary part of life, under secularism, one must believe that our emotional natural response to suffering is incorrect or irrational. But under Christianity, our emotional response to suffering, this universal feeling of heartbreak at the loss of a loved one, the anger at injustice, and the distress of anxiety or loneliness, is validated and given meaning. In our next section, Salome will expand on this by explaining how our natural human response to suffering is cradled by the resource that Christianity provides to respond to suffering. But before we move on to that, we'll hear from our opposition. And in ending today, I'm contending that Christianity provides a better explanation for suffering than secularism because it offers a more comprehensive and more satisfying explanation of suffering, with a greater number of logical links as to why suffering exists and why we feel like it's bad. Our explanation makes sense logically, emotionally, and practically. And these are the questions that our opposition will have to answer in their explanation. Why is suffering bad, and why do we experience distress? If they haven't answered these, they haven't addressed the topic, and they must provide an alternative explanation. When they're presenting, we want you to be asking this question: does their explanation make sense of the reality of suffering better than our explanation? Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. And now I'd love to invite Seeming up from the MPS. Please make him feel welcome.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. Now, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Bella, for that fine speech. My name is Siming. Me and my partner, Andrew, will be defending a secular explanation of suffering today. I'm going to outline that explanation, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons why we think that is a good explanation, as it responds to individual needs, allows creative new ways to understand suffering, and it gives us tools to combat suffering in the real world. I am going to show you why that explanation is good on its own terms, independently of how it compares to the explanation given by our friends across the floor. In our second speech, Andrew is going to show you and examine the Christian explanation of suffering and compare it to our own. So let's start with the most basic definition. Suffering is a universal human experience. It encompasses both physical and mental pain, sometimes as the anguish of illness, or the sorrow of grief, or the anxiety of uncertain circumstances. What makes it for a good explanation? On a purely causative level, doctors and psychologists could reduce suffering to merely brain signals responding to stimuli, or a evolutionary response to an imperfect world. In a sense, that is accurate, but we want to go deeper. We believe that an explanation of suffering should also tell us how to respond to the suffering we see in the world, or that we experience ourselves. To that end, our approach to suffering is broad and multifaceted, embracing a variety of interpretations without prescribing a specific doctrine, whether religious or atheist. Secularism, distinct from atheism, allows a plurality of different beliefs to coexist and to interact and borrow from one another. So, within our experience of suffering, we want different people to be able to approach, to confront, to find meaning, or to find solace from suffering, each in their own way, unbounded by any single doctrinal explanation. One of the important strengths of secularism emerges: inclusivity. For instance, Buddhists might interpret suffering as a fundamental part of life, caused by attachment and desire. The Buddha's path offers a way to alleviate suffering through the development of wisdom and the alleviation of desires. An absurdist, conversely, might perceive suffering as a meaningless aspect of existence, prompting individuals to create meaning in life despite intrinsic absurdities. This perspective encourages individual freedom in the pursuit of authentic experiences. Both perspectives provide valuable insights for those who resonate with them. So, let's talk about why we think that is a good approach. Firstly, as each individual has their own experience of suffering and their own unique character, we give space for multiple different personal approaches to suffering. So, you're more likely to find the approach that best suits you. The experience of someone who is struggling with incurable, painful disease is very different to someone who is fleeing famine in Sudan, which is very different from someone who's mourning the death of a friend, which is very different from someone who has failed the econ exam. Some people find themselves stressed by every minor setback. For them, discovering techniques that help free them from immediate desire could be very beneficial. Some people enjoy their own cynical realism. When that person is fighting disease, they might find it comforting to think that there is no celestial force that decided that they deserve this disease. The hard realism of their worldview allows them to focus on the immediate tasks around them, rather than grand cosmic plans. Every instance of suffering is a unique confluence of character and circumstance, different in important ways from all the other instances of history. I want to be absolutely clear here. If someone is suffering and genuinely finds solace in a religion, we would not try to tell them that they are wrong to do so. But we will maintain, firstly, that for most people, a revelation to suffering that does not rely on a particular supernatural figure in the universe will be a preferable explanation. And Andrew will talk more about that. Secondly, we will maintain that it is better to see religious explanation as a set of tools, stories, or metaphors that we borrow from as needed, rather than a description of the capital T truth of the universe. Because the tools of religion are useful on their own, without the faith behind them. For instance, meditation from Buddhist tradition is good for mental health, even if you don't buy into the Buddhist notion that you must free yourself from the cycle of reincarnation. Or having a meeting every week, akin to a church meeting, to talk to your community and think about how to be a virtuous person is useful, even if you don't think Christ died for your sins. By the way, the Philosophy Club meets every Thursday at 5. So you know, you can also come to those meetings. Thus, a secular approach to suffering allows us to see why these useful tools and apply them to our own individual circumstances. This leads to my second argument. Our explanation gives space for creativity in generating wholly new approaches to suffering, because diverse perspectives in understanding suffering come together and lead to creative solutions that help us deal with suffering. For instance, integrating ideas and meditation practices from Eastern philosophies with Western psychological therapies has led to things like cognitive behavioral therapy. These cross-cultural exchanges enrich our understanding and provide a more comprehensive understanding to address suffering and more tools to address suffering. So, for anyone experiencing suffering, the secular approach allows them multiple different ways to find solace or meaning in that experience. Thirdly, let's talk about how we respond to the suffering we see in the world. Why do we think we should do something about the suffering of others? Because it's very simple. We want to see each other happy. Because we empathize with the suffering of others. Because it breaks my heart to see the suffering of the world treated with indifference. So we do not need anything supernatural to motivate us to combat suffering. Our humanity stands on its own. And it is by knowing that the universe is neither just or unjust on its own that we come to understand that any injustice we wish to find must come from our own making. Secularism impels us to act on our own empathy and an innate sense of duty. So there is a purpose. We have seen this approach to suffering effectively. When Doctors Without Borders, a secular charity, stays in the combat zone where many other charities leave, when we see the construction of secular welfare states. What motivates them is not religious zeal, but a human compassion and empathy for all. Therefore, in conclusion, the secular approach's emphasis on diversity makes them more encompassing and adaptive framework for understanding and addressing suffering. It values multiple perspectives, and it fosters an environment of respect and collaboration. This inclusivity honors the rich diversity of human experience and gives us ways to find more effective and compassionate solutions to alleviate suffering. This is why we believe secularism is the best approach to explain suffering in our world. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Siming. I'd like to invite Salome from MCU.
Is it on? Can you tell if it's on? Okay, sick. The nature of suffering is such that it is an incredibly pervasive force that deeply impacts our lives and the lives of those around us, friends, family, colleagues. And it is for this reason that suffering demands a response. And it's ultimately Christianity that provides a better mechanism for how to respond to suffering. Now, Christianity does this both personally and practically. Firstly, personally, the first argument here is that God suffered. Jesus, who was God in human form, lived a human life and died a human death. And in doing that, it meant that he experienced the suffering that was inherent in those experiences. Not only this, the kind of death that Jesus died was the most horrific death that a human could die. It was excruciating, it was humiliating, it was unjust, and it was deeply lonely. And so Jesus, God, knows what it's like to have a friend die, to be lonely, to be distressed, to physically suffer and die. Not only this, Christians also believe that the Holy Spirit, God sends his Spirit to live in believers. And so not only does God have a general understanding of what human suffering is like, he also has a particular empathy for each believer. And so this is incredibly important because when we talk about the impacts of this, Jesus provides a model for how to suffer well, and he also cares and comforts for sufferers. Importantly, you don't have to believe the tenets of Christianity to believe that Christianity provides a better model for addressing suffering, but it does, and secularism cannot compete with it. Importantly, people need a model of how to suffer well, because lots of us respond particularly poorly to suffering. And even if it's not you sitting there who responds poorly to suffering, somebody else beside you in your row will. This is self-evidently true, but it's also true because often responding to suffering in an unhealthy manner is easy. Drinking, scrolling on Instagram for 4 hours, blaming yourself and others, it's a lot easier as a mechanism to respond to suffering. But Jesus doesn't do this. Jesus provides us with the model for how to respond to suffering that we actually need. Why? Because given Jesus is God, all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-good, and he experienced great suffering firsthand, we think that he is a worthwhile person to listen to. Now, specifically, Jesus took a healthy middle ground into how he responded to suffering. On one end of the spectrum, you have wallowing, you have sitting in your suffering, and you have a prolonged experience there. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have self-medicating, ignoring your suffering and denying it. And neither of these approaches are healthy. Instead, Jesus provides this middle ground. He didn't float above suffering at all. He experienced it, he wept, and he felt very deeply about that suffering, but he then used this to act. Now let's compare to secularism. Under secularism, there is no model. In fact, there's a complete lack of guidance. Note that this is directly responsive to the material that MPS gives you. There's nothing telling you or somebody you know that you should be attempting to respond well. Sure, there are things in society that are considered adaptive and healthy, but under secularism, it's your life and you can do what you want with it. If the person next to you wants to engage in self-destructive coping mechanisms, that's fine, and you don't have a logical basis to tell them otherwise. The second impact here is that Christianity believes in a God who suffered and died for us. This is a God who knows, cares, and understands our suffering. Now, people are deeply lonely in general, but they're particularly lonely in their suffering. What Christianity uniquely offers is a God who is always there. The bottom is not as deep for Christians because they are never alone. Now, the second argument for why Christianity provides a better the second argument for why Christianity provides a better means of addressing suffering is the promise of a hope for the future. So God promises a new heaven and a new earth. And so Bella explains quite clearly that suffering is a failure to flourish and the associated distress. She explained that God is our creator, sustainer, and provider, and that when the world rejects God, our sustaining and providing force, suffering naturally enters the world. When Jesus died and rose back to life again, he took on the consequences of that suffering so that we don't have to bear them. And when Jesus comes back and puts the world right, there will be no suffering. Under secularism, the best that they can offer is good and bad days. This is the one hope for the future that they can provide. But what if it's chronic? What if it's enduring? Dementia, illness. This isn't a true end to suffering. Instead, what secularism offers there is the hope that one day you will die. I don't know about you, but I do not think that is a good hope. Now, the difference here is that Christianity offers hope, and it's not just hope in death. Christianity's hope that they offer is a hope of a renewed life, of life that is filled with infinitely more flourishing. And importantly, this is also life that will outweigh the suffering that is on earth. I think intuitively, when you weigh up these two forms of hope, you can see which stands the test to a better extent. Now, finally, Christianity also provides a present-day remedy for suffering. It's addressing suffering practically. In the present day, Christians are called to care for others, especially the weak and the vulnerable, and to share in each other's suffering. This is both an explicit command and an active incentive. We are told to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. But additionally, we are incentivized to do this because Christ suffered for us, and because we model how we live and behave off Christ, we have an active incentive to care for others in their suffering as well. And it follows then that suffering is at least partially helped and remedied by those supporting others who are suffering. To the degree that people understand Christianity, it provides a clear duty and a desire to assist others. Secularism doesn't. Now, I'm not going to say that secularists can't or don't aid others in their suffering. That would be incredibly disingenuous, and I'd be lying to people in this room. But these actions are in spite of the logical basis of secularism. Because under secularism, what is good and bad is subjective. It's all about determining your own meaning. That's what we hear in Siming's speech. So whether you help someone or not is dependent on your personal convictions, culture, norms. You have no basis to tell somebody else that they should aid their suffering friend, because there is no moral goodness outside of the individual person. And historically, this is represented in the way that Christians behave. It's no secret that the saying Good Samaritan is still a term that we use in our society. Now, I'll preempt the rebuttal that there is an inherent good in humans and that we simply should help others because that is what is right and we have empathy for them. But I would question, and I hope that you question this too, what part of secularism says that there is inherent dignity in humans? Because Christianity says that it is because we are made in the image of God. But note that there was no reason provided under secularism's side. Thank you. Wow. Dude, I actually can't.
Thank you, Salome. And I'd love to invite Andrew, our final speaker, to come from MPS.
Testing, can people hear me? Fantastic. Thank you, Joash, and thank you, Salome. We have been told that the Christian explanation provides great comfort to people in their time of need. For some, that's true, but for some, they find their faith absolutely shattered by the suffering they experience or that they encounter. For others, they live their whole lives dissatisfied, plagued by doubt because of the Christian stories, but remaining with the Christian explanation because that is all they know, or they are afraid of losing their family and friends if they lose their faith. I'm going to show you why people react that way, why that's in fact an extremely common reaction, and why a secular approach to suffering in fact provides the majority of people with a far better way to find consolation in the face of suffering. In the process, I'm going to examine how each team wants you to judge what makes a better explanation of suffering, and show that our explanation is a better and more satisfying response to the experience of suffering on an intellectual level, on the level of solace and meaning, and on the level of how we combat suffering in the world. Let's start by asking which explanation is most intellectually satisfying at the most basic causative level, where we provide an explanation free from the myriad logical problems of the Christian stories. On the most superficial level, we explain the material fact of suffering simply by the fact that we're born into a physical universe that does not always meet our needs. Sometimes that's our need for food and water, or shelter, or a cure to disease, or companionship and love. Suffering is us communicating with ourselves that our needs are not met and becomes worse as those needs remain unfulfilled. The Christian explanation, by adding God's desires and plans as part of that explanation, runs into a great deal of trouble stemming from that addition. Every child finds logical inconsistencies with Christian theology and the idea of an all-powerful, all-loving God. How can our actions be free if they are also part of God's plan? Why does Christ need to be tortured to forgive us our sins? Why, if our sins are forgiven, do we need to worry about sins at all? If God loves us so much, why will children be born whose whole lives will be one hospital visit after another as they slowly die to a painful disease? Why is the universe so unjust? These are a child's questions, but after 2,000 years, there is still no satisfying answer, because each answer to these problems runs into yet more problems. Suffering seems to have no relationship to justice, and instead seems like the results of a finite material universe. Suffering is not apportioned out based on whether you rejected God or whether you didn't. Christians suffered just as much as everyone else. Well, fine then. Christians can propose a couple more universes to make up the difference so that justice can happen there. Well, firstly, it's unclear to me why the idea that a murderer will be tortured in hell actually makes it right that a particular child has an incurable disease. So if you're trying to add up the mathematics of justice and suffering that way, God still comes up short. And anyway, how does a loving God allow something like hell to exist? Well, maybe there's another element of the explanation. Maybe hell's not so bad and it's just an absence of God. Well, okay, then what happened to the murderer in the first explanation? And why does the ability to earn forgiveness stop once you're dead? What's so special about these 70-odd years in this particular plane of existence that means your chance stops at the end of it? These are all questions that, again, I just don't have answers to. Because the fact is, a loving God and such unjust suffering is simply an unresolvable inconsistency, which is why the Christian explanation has a deeply unsatisfying character. One layer after another of scaffolding and metaphysics and new cosmic realms to keep the whole rickety business upright. But every new layer, just a new layer of reasons to doubt them. The secular explanation, by conceding that very often suffering is unjust, that it is not metaphysically related to sin or the rejection of God, that there's no supernatural plan to save us from suffering, has at this first level an explanation that at least does not arrive with so much intellectual baggage, and is clearly the better causative intellectual explanation for suffering. This interacts with the second metric of the debate, which is our ability to use the explanation to find solace or meaning in the face of suffering. Because when you arrive with so much inconsistency and contradiction, it acts as a poison. You tell yourself it's part of God's plan. You act like it to those around you. And if you don't think about it, maybe you can feel like you believe it for a moment, but inside you don't believe it. You don't feel it. The solace you find is poisonous because it comes from a poison source. Because you do think about it. You can't help it. You're human. That poison worsens when the Christian doctrine, when you follow it to its conclusion, has unwelcome implications. Does God really think we deserve to suffer? Are you so uniquely sinful that you are singled out by God to be tortured more than other people? Christian explanations often come up with an element of self-blame that is insidious in itself and too often weaponized by bigots calling themselves Christian. Instead of providing a sense of fulfilling meaning or solace for our wounds, the more likely result is dejection, a feeling of the absence of God's love when you suffer. It's shame, and we don't think that's right. I want to reiterate what Siming said here. We're not proposing we go out and rip the Bible out of the hands of those who find their solace there. But for most people, it would be better to see the tools of various religions as simply tools for dealing with their suffering rather than as a true explanation of the universe. And Salome conceded this when she said that you can use the tools of Christianity without necessarily believing it. Fantastic. That's what secularism is. Welcome to the team. We have explained to you how having a greater variety of tools drawn in from multiple cultures allows you to find the tool that best gives you comfort or to be strong for a struggling family member. Christianity binds you to a small subset of legitimate Christian ways to think about suffering, but there are many for whom that explanation is not the explanation that will best help them. By being free from the doctrines of Christianity, you are able to set aside a tool that might not work for you and find something new and better. I would also add something here. There is something unique about approaching suffering from a secular explanation. When I grieve the death of a loved one, when I feel the pain of their passing, that pain is how I know my love for them was real. Because for me, that suffering has no other cause nor explanation but that I loved them. It is not something sent to me by God. It is from my own heart. And I think that is an important and powerful way of confirming my own love and my own humanity. So thirdly, which explanation best helps us combat the causes of suffering in the world? Siming told you the motive to help others is our human empathy and our compassion for one another, and that those things are sufficient to compel us to help one another, and that a secular perspective, in fact, impels us to create a just world for ourselves, because we are the only source of justice. We cannot wait for a God to come and provide it for us. And since we all understand that fairness is better than unfairness and justice better than injustice, we do not need someone else to tell us that those things are good. We are just as motivated to help others as side Christian. But how do we go about it? Much of suffering can be attributed to a solvable cause, like a lack of food aid in Sudan, or the negligence of corporations in stopping their own carcinogenic pollution, or a society's indifference robbing resources from vital services. We can all do something about those services. For a Christian, most of those examples are in some way caused by sin. But for them, the suffering isn't what makes pride or greed bad, it's the distortion of the relationship of God, or the metaphysics of sin. That subtle difference in explanation ends in an enormous distortion in how we respond to suffering. There are lots of things that could be called sin and to which you might misattribute the cause of suffering, like homosexuality or hedonism. While a secularist would focus on the causative explanation, a Christian focus on a metaphysical link between sin and suffering and an expectation that all suffering be caused and explicated by that sin allows all manner of sins to be inappropriately drawn in. This firstly stops an accurate identification of true fixable causes, and secondly allows fears and biases to cloud how people respond. Doesn't matter that you can't say how the gay people caused the hurricane. There's suffering. You better find someone's sin to blame for it. Too often, the Christian perspective, far from motivating charity, is instead used as cover for bigotry and hate in a way that cannot be done by secularists. We provide the most intellectually satisfying explanation, the one that gives the greatest ability to find emotional meaning and solace, and the best way to solve suffering in the world. That's why we oppose.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd love to invite the
All
MCs
right.
back up to run us through the next part of the night. Thanks.
All right. Some very interesting questions, very interesting assertions and lines of argument from both sides. I'm sure lots of you guys have lots of questions. In fact, my phone has been buzzing because my friends have been texting me their questions about this debate. If you've got questions, feel free to scan that, and Manus will tell you a bit more about the QR code.
Yeah, so we would love to have your questions, and we're going to have we've put time aside, and the debaters have graciously agreed to answer some of your questions. However, you can look around, you can see we're not going to have time for each one of you to even submit half a question. So, in here, is it right, Hamish, that you can upvote questions? Okay, well, in here, Hamish and Rahil down here will go through and kind of try and compile questions together that are similar. And we're sorry that we have to do that, but it's just the way we can get through more questions. And we do encourage you, think through it, think what question you want to submit, scan the QR code, and submit it.
Well, all right. If you guys want to take a bathroom break or just stretch your legs, feel free to head out and take a ride. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in 8 minutes. Cheers.
All right. If you could take your seats, that would be wonderful.
Can we start making our way back to the seats, please?
Thanks, guys. Take a seat when you can. Thanks, guys, for coming back so quickly. We're now going to head into a time of rebuttals. So I'll get our moderator, Josh, to come back up and explain to you how it'll work.
Thanks, Marnus. Yes, if you could grab your seats, that'd be wonderful. And what we're going to be doing now is having a bit of time where the speakers can engage with each other. So just explaining the rules so you can kind of catch along. What's going to be happening is we're going to be having 5-minute blocks where a team gets kind of the floor to just do what they want with that, where they can either ask questions of the other team or present material. It will be a time where they can interject. I might just pull things back if they get a bit out of hand, but otherwise we're just going to let them go. And we're going to do 5 minutes, 5 minutes, and do 3 cycles of that. So that should take us about half an hour. And then afterwards, we'll have a Q&A time where you can be interacting with this. So whilst that's happening, I encourage you to keep using the QR code to get your questions down. But yes, without further ado, what we're going to do is we'll start with the affirmative and then go to the negative. So we'll give 5 minutes to the MCU to start.
Okay, so first question. You say that Christians have caused suffering. We agree. Secularists have also caused suffering. So what is the difference there?
So the first thing to say is that, yeah, both sides have people that cause suffering. So it doesn't seem to be the case that Christianity uniquely stops people from causing the suffering of others. So that's the first thing to point out. So if there is this immense impetus to do good things that comes from Christianity, we would expect to see more of it in the behavior of Christians throughout history. But throughout history, in fact, the opposite has been the case. And we've seen things like the Crusades or colonialism and so on. When it comes to secularism and how that impels us to stop the suffering we see in the world, we think that it's self-evidently good that a just world is better than an unjust world, and that therefore we have to do something about it. We think that because we are human beings and we share a common humanity and we empathize with one another, these are all totally innate things that every normal human being experiences, that those things are themselves perfectly capable of motivating us to do good. And because we can't trust that that good will come from anywhere else, then we have to do something ourselves. We agree not everyone perfectly manifests that, but we think that impetus is there and something that certainly we try to manifest in our daily lives.
I can respond to the first part of that, and Salome can respond to the second. So I think there was a point there made first about the fact that Christians do cause suffering, and we would expect better from Christianity when it provides such a model for how to respond to suffering and how to create a just world. We agree with that. And I'm going to present an analogy here, which might be helpful. Take something like Beethoven's First Symphony. Now, Beethoven was an expertise at composing. But when a really bad piano player comes along and tries to perform that piece, it's not going to sound good. And the imitation of the pure source is flawed. And in the same way, we can align this to Christianity. Now, Jesus Christ was God incarnate. He was the perfect man, sinless, never innocent man. And he gives us a model for how we should live and how we should respond to suffering. But as I explained in my opening statement, we have rejected God. We live in this substandard state of suffering and death and an inability to live as we were created to live. And this means that we are inherently flawed. I think that's something that secularism and Christianity agree on. People are inherently flawed. We do bad things to each other. And so the imitation of Christ that Christians try to pursue, we will not always get right. And that's not an excuse for the terrible atrocities that the church has committed, and that's not letting us off the hook. But there is room for grace in there, in the fact that imperfect humans will not be able to imitate Christ in the way that he lived. But that doesn't really have any relation to the model that is provided by Christ and whether or not that is good. That is an independent thing. And so I think it is fair to consider the independent model that Christ gives us by itself and sort of separate that from the imperfect imitations of Christians.
Okay, cool. You basically say that fairness is better than unfairness, and it is intuitively true that this is the case. We ask you, what what is actually the difference between Christianity and secularism if both do wrong? But I think importantly, Christianity provides a reason for why murdering a child is wrong. It provides a reason for why fairness is better than unfairness, because there is a standard of what is good and bad outside the individual person, rather than you simply coming up with that meaning by yourself. Yeah, curious to see how you would address this.
You've got about half a minute. Yeah.
Do all of morality in half a minute. Look, we think that we find ourselves born into a world with empathy, with the desire to see our friends smile, with hurt when we see others hurt. We are born with an innate sense of fairness. And from those basic self-evident premises, you can build morality up from them. Because I know that it hurts me to see a loved one die, I know that it hurts someone else to see that loved one die. And because I know it's bad when I suffer, I know it's bad when they suffer. And so we don't need a supernatural force to sort of bridge that gap between us. I also want to say that I don't think it's necessarily bad that we don't have some celestial force that is the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. It is frightening that we ourselves have to take upon us the duty of determining right actions and wrong actions based on those premises. But it is our duty, and I think it's important that it is our duty, because that's how we know it's authentic, that's how we know it comes from us. I think it's actually a strength of secularism that it doesn't require something else to come down and tell us what makes something good and bad, but it's something that we have done the hard work of grappling with, that we have searched our soul to try and find the right answer to. I think that the work we do is what makes it real in a very important way.
Andrew,
if you wanted to add something to that.
You guys can take your 5 minutes. So you can keep going or go.
Maybe I will say. Yeah. Also, I feel just on the analogies drawn by Bella, I think, yes, you could say that we're bad performers, but I don't see a reason why God would make us these bad performers, these bad imitators of the perfect grace. We know from the Christian definition that God is omnipotent and omnibenevolent. So what possible reason is there for God to create us into imperfect beings? Obviously, if he is, as he claims, omnipotent, he has the ability to make us into something perfect as well, right? Yeah, sorry about this. I'm getting a bit too excited for this. All right. So, I'm not sure why, if there really is a reason for this. Why do we suffer indeed? If God is omnipotent and omnibenevolent, he could easily avoid this. There's no possible logical justification to make us into bad performers and bad imitators. And
Do you want to get a response?
yeah, I'll say maybe the Christians could respond to that.
So I think the underlying assumption there is that God makes us to be bad performers, or that he makes us to be imperfect, right? And so the question arises, firstly, does God make imperfect things? I don't think God makes imperfect things. However, I do think that God gives us free will. And the reason that God gives us free will is because I don't think that he would desire for us to be robots walking around who simply exist to serve him. But at the point at which you give somebody free will, you give them the ability to do evil. You also give them the ability to do good, but that does not mean that God creates something inherently evil and flawed. It just gives them the capacity to do so.
Yeah, just responding to that. Sure, we do have free will, as the Christians claim. But again, okay, I know that sounds very aggressive, but hear me out, okay? I promise you it's going to be good. But I think that's precisely where the Christians are wrong. Actually, it's a fallacy to both believe in free will and also believe that God is omniscient. Why? First, free will means, I suppose, in some sense, agency or ability to make a difference, right? But if God knows everything that's going to happen, what kind of a difference are we making here? Supposedly, God knows in the end who will be saved and who isn't. So why give us this illusion of free will in this case? Either God is omniscient or God does not give us, free will and omniscience cannot exist together. But even let's say that's true. And let's say that we take their words for granted and that we do have free will on this earth. And, in order for us to have free will, the precondition is that we have to have some kind of evil and suffering. Okay, if free will is so important, then tell me, when we go to heaven, will there be suffering? Supposedly not, right? Heaven should be a perfect place void of suffering. So if we do go to heaven, and if suffering doesn't exist, would we still have free will in heaven? No, right? We won't be able to have free will in heaven. So if free will is so important, why should we relinquish our free will in heaven? Do we just become machine-like beings in heaven, like robots, like AI? That doesn't really sound like heaven to me, does it? So can you please answer me then why that's the case?
Thanks, MC. That actually times well to your next 5 minutes.
Thank you for your question. Yes, you raised some good points about things that seem to be paradoxes in the Christian faith, like free will, but also God's all-powerful nature and all-knowing nature. But Christianity doesn't see this as a paradox, because you actually touched on this point. The idea that God loves us sort of necessitates free will. So for a parent to truly love their child, they have to be able to help them learn by themselves. They have to give them free will. If God made us just to do his will and to do what he wanted us to do, we wouldn't be truly free. And so him giving us free will is a sign of his love. But that doesn't compromise on his all-powerful and all-knowing nature, because it is perfectly compatible for God to be all-powerful and all-knowing, but to not exercise that power in certain situations because he is prioritizing his love for us and our free will. Just because he has power to stop us from sinning or to stop us from doing evil just because we do evil doesn't mean that he doesn't have this power. He just chooses when to exercise it and when not to. And the question of whether or not we will have free will in heaven is an interesting one. I think the Bible talks about how when we get to heaven, there will be a new heaven and new earth. We will have a new nature. And although Christianity doesn't understand maybe the intricacies of how this will work, we do take it to be true that in heaven we will just be new beings. And this doesn't mean that we cannot sin. It just means that we will not sin, though we still have that free will and that capacity to turn away from God. When we get to heaven, we are promised that we won't. And so we will not endure a state of suffering and of death as we do in this world.
I think it's also worth noting that God is simply God, meaning that he is outside of time. And so it's very possible for us to make choices and for God to know their impacts well into the future in a way that we're not able to know. And he is therefore able to incorporate his choices in his plan because the threshold that God sits at and the reality that he occupies is simply so much greater than our own. And it's for this reason that you're able to have both free will in that we can do things. I chose to put on the shirt that I am wearing, for example, but also God is able to then still utilize those in his plans and incorporate them because he has control. Okay, I'm assuming we're asking another question. Excellent. We'd like to ask MPS, what hope does secularism provide for those who are suffering?
Yeah, so secularism provides a whole range of tools that we can have in order to combat the suffering that we find ourselves. We can use things like various meditative practices from Buddhism. We can try and dwell on the thought that maybe there is a purpose coming from Christianity. You might have a stoic approach where you might try and focus your mind only on things that you have the capacity to change, and so that you're not distracted by things you can't. And that might be a real tool to alleviate suffering. But our point here is that every single person is different and has different ways in which they will find meaning and different ways that they can respond to meaning. So limiting us to a single set of tools might be good for the sort of person for whom Christian tools are good for them, but for somebody else who finds the Christian explanations deeply unsatisfying, but who finds meditative practices particularly helpful, then a different source of meaning is necessary for them. And so we should construct a secular way of seeing the world so that people can take from different tools in the way that best suited to their individual circumstances.
Thanks. MPS, it's now your time with the floor.
So I find myself confessing that some of the explanations for the paradoxes of Christianity did not satisfy me from what was just said. Just that we don't understand the intricacies, we take it on faith, and okay, I understand it's a religion, you kind of have to at some point. Do you accept that for a lot of people, that answer is not going to be satisfying for them?
Yes, I definitely see where you're coming from there. From an intellectual perspective, it is desirable to have intellectual explanations for these things. And you're right that a lot of things we have to take on the basis of faith. That is not untrue for secularism. Everybody lives by faith in the sense that there are certain things that we can never know, and there are certain things that we won't know, but we choose to live in a certain way based on certain things that we believe to be true on a basis of faith. And this question of what it will be like in heaven, whether or not we can fall again, whether or not there will be sin and suffering in heaven, I don't find this personally particularly relevant to our topic here today, in the sense that we are providing explanations for why suffering exists in this world and how to respond to it in this world. And although questions of a potential afterlife do come into account there, I think I still find it unsatisfying that secularism is unable to provide satisfying explanations for why suffering exists in the world and for why we should respond to it in a certain way. Because without a objective basis for what is good and what is bad and what is just and what is unjust, and what is fair and what is unfair, which are terms that we've both used a lot tonight, I think it becomes really hard to weigh up good actions and bad actions and go forward in a path to alleviate suffering.
So am I to take it then that for you, the benefit of Christianity is that it's all just sort of laid out for you in the book. It just explains this is just, this isn't just, this is good, this is bad?
I mean, I do think that's a fair oversimplification of what Christianity provides, right? I think that, yes, Christianity provides a framework of why suffering exists, but I also think that Christianity gives you a guidebook in terms of how you're meant to respond to that suffering. So I mentioned Jesus being the middle ground example. But note that Christianity doesn't provide an exhaustive list of how exactly you're meant to respond to suffering. It doesn't provide an exhaustive list of ABC, here's exactly what you're meant to do. But importantly, it protects against the worst ends of that spectrum. It protects against the self-medicating end, and it protects against the wallowing end. Because what I don't think secularism is dealing with here is they want to tell you essentially that you can take from a bunch of different toolboxes. But what about the fact that not all toolboxes are good? What about the maladaptive and harmful toolboxes? Because I don't think that Christianity just arbitrarily sets out everything, but it does provide you a framework and provides you the best kinds of toolboxes that you should be picking from.
Sure, but haven't you already conceded that people don't follow that framework? That they're imperfect vessels of that framework? I have the quote here. The imitation of the pure source is flawed, which seems to concede the practical claim that people just don't have the response that you need them to have out of that in order to make a practical claim that, in fact, in the real world, people's behavior is better, that people's response to suffering is better. You have a model, but not any people following it.
I would note that quite a few people do follow it, firstly. But secondly, right, like, I don't think that you judge a framework's validity on how people carry out that framework. It is, I don't want to say logically prior. I'm sorry, that's a debating term. It is logically prior. It is previous. I think you would concede that essentially when we're evaluating the validity of an argument or a framework, you first look at the premise and then you look at the impacts and how that flows out, right? And so do I think that people follow Christianity's model perfectly? No. Do I think that that necessarily means that Christianity is untrue or unhelpful? Also, no. And so importantly, it means that the people who do follow this and who do actually buy into the framework have a much better means of responding to suffering. And this topic is about which side provides the better means, right? And so the fact that people do respond better when they buy into it is incredibly persuasive in this way of thinking.
We've come to 20 minutes. We've got 10 minutes left. So one thing I've noticed, there may be an impasse here. I think what you guys are suggesting is a one amongst many approach, which includes the Christian worldview. Is that correct? Yeah. And I think that the Christians here are suggesting it's the only way. May I suggest we either clarify that or move on to a new topic of discussion for the last 5 minutes? And a reminder, you are allowed to interject as well. You guys have been very civil, which is nice.
I'm interested in the answer.
Maybe these guys want a little bit of fire. I don't know. Yeah. But we're going to now go to our last block of 5. So we're going to pass it to MCU. For theirs. Oh, sure.
All right, so our question is, both of you mentioned quite a lot in your speech, the idea of our humanity, the idea that to be sad at the loss of a loved one is something that comes from something inherent in us, a sense of what is just and fair, something that comes from an inherent human nature. And yeah, I think you also mentioned that we are born into a world of empathy and born into a world of innate justice, where we want innate justice. We're just curious to ask, on what basis does secularism account for this widespread human intuition? And what is secularism's answer when some people do not seem to have the same intuitions? And you can look at examples throughout history of atrocities that have been committed, not just by Christians and by lots of different people. How would you account for those two things?
So the first one, I think, is in part an evolutionary response. We are communal creatures, and so over time we evolved the ability to understand other people in our communities. We wanted to cooperate across communities, so we evolved the ability to extend that cooperation, that empathy, to more and more, the ever-widening circles, right? I also think that as human beings, what we do whenever we talk to someone, whenever we encounter someone, is we try to imagine what it is like to be them, so that we can, better talk to them, we can better understand them, we can get what we want out of them, or we can protect ourselves if we think they're threatening to us. But what that does is it means there are parts of our brain that are always thinking, what is it like to be this person? What is it like to experience the things that this person is thinking? And I think that that's something that's inherent to any human being that is trying to navigate the world. Obviously, there are people whose brains are simply broken and are born psychopaths and don't have that capacity. And that's unfortunate, and I don't know why God did that. And obviously, then we need to do things that try and mitigate the suffering that those people cause. There's probably a spectrum of those people, and some of them deserve empathy, and some of them we just need to utilize the tools of the criminal justice system. But these are sort of material troubles that should be looked at in a material way. We need to work out who is causing suffering, why are they causing it, is there something we can do about it, what are the tools available to us? And once again, having a deep range of tools in order to deal with the reasons other people cause suffering is probably an advantage. Saming, did you have anything?
No, actually, I'd like to hear the response first, so I can respond to it.
I think I have a question in response to that, which is there is still an underlying assumption that humans should act in a do unto others way, if you will, a way that treats others as they would want to be treated. I think we just don't see this as much as you're claiming. And you take an example like the Holocaust, and you look at what actually was seen by Hitler to be something that was good for society, good for the flourishing of society, to restrict the human race to one specific group of people. And this was good for survival. This was good for evolution. Now, that perspective under Christianity, Christianity has a basis to say what happened then was wrong and was unjust. Secularism, especially coming from the evolutionary point of view, I don't think has any basis on which to say that what happened in the Holocaust was wrong, because if it is in line with survival mechanisms and in line with evolution, there's no basis to say that what happened there was wrong.
This is your last 5 minutes, just so we can all, make sure we.
Okay, yeah. So I won't waste too much time on this. But it seems a bit ridiculous to me to claim that Christians are better at forming a moral groundwork. I mean, you don't have to look too far into history to see that the Christians have committed countless atrocities in history. I mean, most of the colonial states in Europe, when they committed all their acts, were predominantly Christian. I mean, the Crusades, that was also committed by Christians under a Christian framework to justify their own actions. We have seen these atrocities happen, and we have seen the Christianity at the time, at least, try to justify these things. So obviously, in this case, we can't really say that the Christians somehow have a better moral groundwork to justify their actions.
Sorry, we just have an interjection. First one of the night.
Okay, sure.
We just wanted to say, I think that goes back to our analogy before about the imperfect imitations of a framework actually have no bearing on what the framework is itself. And again, my question was about Christianity provides an objective moral framework on which to say something is good and something is bad, something is just and something is unjust. And my question was, what basis does secularism provide on which to say something is just and something is unjust? You could even simplify that to the question of, under secularism, what is justice?
So, talking firstly about the Holocaust, I'd point out a couple of things. The first is that most of the Germans who committed the Holocaust were Christian at the time. Secondly, I think that my empathy for the people in the camps, the Jewish people, is something that comes from seeing the images of the camps, seeing the faces of the people who were rescued. That's how I know what was happening there was wrong and that their rescue was just. That again comes from that. But I'm just curious, you're saying that no bad thing that a Christian does can adhere to your framework, but apparently bad things that secularists do adhere to ours. Well, which is it? Is a framework judged by the actions of the people following it, or isn't it?
Okay, two responses here. Firstly, on the claim of, on the question of whether you judge a framework by its responses, no. But I think where Christianity differs here is that Christianity actually provides a metric for judging those responses and saying why they're wrong. Essentially, most of your claims around what makes something right or wrong is an intuitive understanding that, like, I can feel empathy for the other person, right? But note that this is my individual understanding of empathy, and that's not objective. Some people draw the line differently between what is right and wrong. And so, no, frameworks should not be judged by their outworkings, but Christianity has a metric for being able to say whether those outworkings are good or bad. Second idea here is essentially throughout most of the responses in like the last few minutes, there's been this idea that, well, don't you think that Christian actions have been wrong, immoral? Have they amplified suffering? Unequivocally, yes, there has been actions based on Christian actors that have amplified suffering. But importantly, all of the circumstances in which these institutions amplify suffering are incongruous with the Christian framework. And we have like plain biblical readings to indicate this. Like Matthew 5:5 would indicate, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. It's so rooted in the faith to the point where 1 John 4:8 would say, whoever does not love does not know God. And so, like,
Just an interjection there. What about all the other verses, the ones where Christ says, I've come to bring the sword, or the one that says, if you lie with another man, you shall be put to death, or all the ones supporting slavery or selling your children into slavery? What about all the massacres God committed throughout the Old Testament? Like, this seems that you're picking and choosing your ethical frameworks based on an empathy that you have and finding the verses that align with an empathy that is already innate to you, rather than the other way around.
So on cherry picking verses or cherry picking parts of the Bible, it is like very important to consider the context behind what those verses are. Are there acts of violence committed in the Bible? Yes. Are those acts of violence surrounded by contexts? Also, yes. So for example, a lot of massacres and violence is actually response to great evils that are happening in societies. So for example, we see, murders of the Canaanites, which is a result of them doing horrific things like child sacrifices, right? So it's not as if to say that like God is necessarily a tyrannical God because of that. And note that violence that's committed in the Bible.
Just to interject here.
I'm just going to say, yeah, so we've come to half an hour, but I think because it's your section, I reckon you should get one more question.
Yeah, just a wide slight interjection on what you're saying, which I think, talking about great evils. Yes, I think it's absolutely right that you should punish someone for committing some great evil. But in the Old Testament, in the book of Job didn't really do anything, right? Just to recap on what happened with poor Job. So basically, God had, okay, guys, come on, this is a good part. I don't want to waste any time here, but it'll be good. Basically, God had a bet with devil. So devil said, I can convert Job into my side. God said, no, you can't. And Satan said, well, how are you going to do that? How do you make sure that this is actually a bet? And God said, okay, I'm just going to punish Job with countless stuff. And I'm sure he will still remain faithful. So what did God do? God killed his cattle, killed everyone, basically in his family, except for himself, and just had him with endless punishments. And now Job is a very devout person. He didn't do anything wrong. He was subjugated to all these sufferings because God felt like he can't lose a bet against the devil. So
yes, Simi, could we?
So
just a question for these guys.
So can you please tell me, where's the great evil that Job committed that deserved punishment in this case?
I think the underlying assumption here is that suffering is a necessity that flows on from committing an evil, which is not always the case. I think we actually present you a very nuanced view there. And importantly, whilst we don't necessarily know why each individual instance of suffering occurs, we know that God is not a cruel and tyrannical God. God suffered for humanity. If God arbitrarily wanted to subject people to suffering without any good reason for this, why on earth would he have suffered himself? At the point at which God decides that he is going to suffer so that he can take the consequences of other people, we know that God is not cruel and tyrannical. And so by virtue of the fact that he is God and all-knowing, he does things that we cannot see because we are limited beings, but we know that he is not a cruel and tyrannical God based on his actions.
Thank you. Can we just give them a round of applause, I think? The night is not over. Actually, this is a really fun part where you get to kind of contribute to the discussion. But can we just recognize and see that there's a model there for emulating later our discussions? Thank you both for being charitable, good listeners, not being inflammatory. I think that's wonderful and a good thing. I'm going to hand it over now to Hamish and Raheel, and they're going to be collating your questions and giving them to the speakers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sitting patiently and listening to the speakers so far. This is the opportunity for you to make your voices heard. We've had the Q&A form open up all night so far. Currently, we have had 107 questions come in. So definitively, it is likely your question will not get answered. That is all the more reason for you to keep chatting about this afterwards and keep holding on to that question. Me and Raheel have been going through these. We've tried to pick out what have been common themes that have come up again and again, as well as pushing aside some things that have just been up to a really wildly off topic because now is just not the time for them. We're going to be asking questions to both MCU and MPS, and we're going to give each team around 3 minutes to respond. Again, because it's come from an audience member, they may not have understood your question perfectly, they may not have answered it perfectly. That's fine. Take your notes, find them afterwards, and make them answer it better that time. We're just going to keep going and try and get you guys engaged with this. For people who've said yes, that they're happy to have a question, put up their hand and get to them. We're going to have the lovely Ben Kelly running around. He'll hand off the microphone. And he'll get your question. Some people will have asked multiple questions. If that's the case and you're not sure which question you've asked that we want to ask out, and we'll give a clarifying statement. If that still doesn't vibrate, we'll just ask it out because timing is more important than some other things. So without further ado, we'd like to start off with a question for both teams. This is about something that's come up a couple times. It says, do you believe that using a tool apart from its intended purpose as deseparation? How do you explain that others find comfort in one solution while it fails to work for others? And MPS, would you like to start with response?
I mean, so we talked a little bit about this, and essentially our belief is that there's a great deal of diversity amongst human beings, and we think that that's good, and we celebrate that diversity. It's what makes life interesting, and what means that there are a whole range of different cultures and different ways of dealing with suffering out there. But because people are so different, then yeah, different tools are going to help them in different ways. And I think, therefore, that allowing access to multiple tools and allowing them the trust to be able to pick the tools for themselves that are best working for themselves is the best response there.
Yep. So I think there may have been a little misunderstanding that let me just clarify. Christianity doesn't actually say that using different tools is bad or not encouraged. It actually that fits within the Christian framework. We Christians do understand, and the Bible talks about the fact that suffering is different for different people. Different people experience it in different ways. And what Salome presented in her case is a range of healthy coping mechanisms to address this suffering. I think this is something we would agree on. There are certain adaptive and maladaptive responses to suffering. Some are more desirable than others. And Christianity doesn't give a prescriptive tool of this is exactly how you should respond to suffering. Christianity agrees that there can be a range of tools. But what Christianity uniquely does is to provide meaning and a basis on which to respond to the suffering. It doesn't prescriptively tell you how you should do that, but it validates your response to suffering, and it gives your suffering meaning within the broader picture of why suffering is a part of the world that we live in, and it gives you a hope for the future. And these are just things that secularism doesn't provide, and this is why we find Christianity, although not prescriptive on the tools to respond to suffering, we find it to be a more satisfying explanation for how to respond to suffering.
Cool. Thank you. Moving on to the next question. This is a question for the MCU. So it says, how does Christianity explain suffering not directly caused by people, for example, natural disasters and diseases?
Okay, cool. I think that essentially you set up the model of God as creator, sustainer, and provider. Now, importantly, that applies as God is the creator, sustainer, and provider of the entire earth. And so when humans reject that order, when humans reject that creator, sustainer, and provider, obviously that breaks the relationship with humans, but that also says that that relationship is broken with the world. And so as a result, you get things like natural disasters and disease because there's now been a break, a separation from the order of how things were meant to be to how things are now.
Our next question will be for MPS. It says, if humans are inherently good, why do we still have the natural instinct to lie, kill, / be violent? Can't humans be trusted to rely on their instincts as their morals if it isn't consistent?
Do you want it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, humans do commit bad things because it isn't within our nature, right? That's what we say as well. Human beings are imperfect, so we have vices, but we also have virtues, right? A part of us, if we're a rational being, understands what is good and bad based on our empathy and our compassion and our understanding from the world coming from ourselves. So of course we can still live our lives aligned with our morals, even if we recognize that we're imperfect. In fact, the recognition that we're imperfect, the recognition that we are still subjugated to suffering that we commit by ourselves is a key drive for us to be better. It's what sometimes motivates us to get out of bed every morning, try to be a good person. So motivates us to go to charities, to go to meetings, to go to therapies. All of these things are a motivation for us to be better. And it arises from this recognition that we are imperfect, that we're still prone to bad vices. Andrew, would you like to say a few things?
Yeah. I'd also say that, like, our case is not that you should follow whatever random instinct occurs to you at any random moment, right? It's that you should exist within social circles, that you should have friends and family, and that you should think about them and your duties towards them, and that you should exist in the context of thousands of years of philosophy developing the ways that we respond to the world, right? We also have our intellects that mediate our instinctual desires, and those intellects show us the tools of philosophy that allow us to say that some of these instincts are in fact going against what we feel to be the most core parts of us, which is our common humanity.
Cool. Thank you, MPS. This next question from MCU is from Thomas Muldowney. Would you like to say a question aloud? Amazing.
Cool. So at the very start, you basically explained that suffering is caused by dislocation from God, but you didn't explain why humans do that. Why would humans, like, even if we have free will, why would we intentionally create our own suffering?
I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to go with the biblical narrative here. And what the biblical narrative lays out is that, yeah, you're right, we were created in a world to live with God. And the question of why humans would choose to reject that and bring all this suffering on the world, the Bible provides one clear answer to that, and it is that we wanted to be our own gods rather than to let God rule the universe. We wanted to be in charge of our own lives and take things into our own hands. And this is the reason why we chose to disobey God. So God had given a direct order to say, there's one tree that you must not eat from. And the serpent in the garden said, did God really say you shouldn't eat from the tree? Look, the fruit looks really nice. I reckon you know better than God. And what we did as humans was say, I reckon we do know better than God. And that's something that we continue to do. That's part of the definition of sin that the Bible gives, is putting ourselves constantly in God's place to think that we have as much knowledge and power as him. And we are proved wrong time and time again with the suffering that we bring to ourselves and to others in the world. And so I think pride would be a good word, a good label to put on that idea that we wanted to be our own gods rather than to follow God, and that's why we disobeyed him.
Our next question for Monash Philosophy Society. If the universe is neither just nor unjust, and justice comes from our own making, how do we make the framework for what justice looks like?
So as we've said before, the universe is neither just nor unjust, but we do have, again, as we said before, we do have empathy. We do want to do something about the suffering of others. So we can still do something about this, despite the fact the universe doesn't really, in this sense, care about us. But also, I think this also will have to clarify something too. We're not saying that religions are incompatible with secularism. You can also seek the solace of religion if that's what you want, or you can build the universe in a different way if that's what you want. Again, it comes to the fact that we have a greater freedom to understand suffering, and that's what makes our approach more attractive, because we can then use this liberty to find the approach that best suits us. And Andrew, would you like to say a few things?
I mean, I guess we're creating justice the same way that the Christians create justice, which is with great difficulty and the best that we can, right? Because any justice that we find in this world is created by human beings acting out that justice. And if human beings want to be Christian, in your argument, want to be Christian because they find justice there, that presumes they already want justice and already recognize it there. And so it seems to me that the premise of your argument concedes sort of the conclusion, right, that justice is something that we innately know. And yeah, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of thought and a lot of time in order to work out what is the most just action in any given circumstance. But we think that that work is important and worth doing.
Cool. Thanks, MPS. This next question is from Edward, and it's posed to both sides. Would Edward like to say it out loud?
I was just asking both MCU and MPS the same question. Fundamentally, both sides have addressed suffering as something that's innately negative, right? But what would you say in response to, for example, an inverse argument, something that claims that suffering is necessary to conceptualize happiness or to understand or to grow, etc.? How would you answer that?
Would you like to go? Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for your question. Absolutely. I think that there are various examples of suffering being used as a mechanism for growth or as a mechanism for being able to produce greater flourishing. But importantly, under Christianity, there's actually a reason for why that can happen, because the universe is not completely random and arbitrary, and you may or may not grow from it. We have God who actively incorporates suffering into his plans for good. And so, absolutely, I think that argument can stand.
If you find meaning in your world by thinking that your suffering valorizes your own struggles through life in some way, or it provides meaning to you or frames your happiness, we are absolutely on board with that. We're really happy that you have responded to suffering in a positive way for you. And I'm confused a little bit about the answer we just got from the Christian Union, because if suffering is a distance from God, then how can suffering be good?
I just want to clarify, this isn't a time for
it's just
cross-examination. Yeah, just write these down, and then you can send paper planes if you'd like over. You can have a little communication, but other than that, we just like this mostly audience engagement if we can.
Cool. Okay. So the next question is from MCU, and it's asked by Tony, if they would like to ask that question.
Hello? Okay, there we go. Yeah, so my question was primarily about the original debate about how humans specifically have like distanced ourselves or disconnected from God. And it was about so animals help themselves, they help each other and themselves, they have compassion. What makes us so different to animals in that regard? Like my dogs groom each other, why don't I help my mate when he needs help? Like
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony, for your question. I think there was an underlying question there of what makes humans different from animals. Why are they distinct? I think a lot of the time we do see similar behaviors exhibited, but Christianity makes it very clear that humans have one thing that makes them distinct, that makes them the center of the creation. I think I mentioned this in my opening statement. It is the fact that humans were made in the image of God, are made in the image of God, and called very good. Everything else God creates, he calls good. He creates everything else first, and then humans are the final thing that he makes, and he calls them very good. And what it means to be made in the image of God as humans is we have a rational capacity that animals do not display. We have a capacity for morality that animals do not display, that they may exhibit similar behaviors. They have no rational capacity to comprehend why certain things are good and certain things are bad. And most importantly, we are made to be relational beings in a way that animals just are not. God, the Bible talks about how God is a triune God, 3 in 1, and this enables God to have the capacity to be relational in himself. And that is something that he makes us to be as well. And so when you observe the capacity that humans have for relationships with one another and compare this to animals, I think that is part of the proof that there is something different and dignified about humans, and it is that we are made in the image of God.
Next question is for MPS from Abigail. The one about, so I'm trying not to give it away. The one about the suffering being a choice of an individual and the alleviation being up to an individual, the ends that can go to.
Yeah, so that one of my 10 questions. I was wondering, you have been very forth in saying it's up to the individual to choose the strategy that they find effective to deal with their pain or their suffering. What about how would you respond to a situation of someone who 100% believe suicide's the only option to alleviate their pain, that's the mechanism they choose, or a mother who is watching their child in unbearable pain decides to kill their child, which has happened before, to end their pain. They're choosing that mechanism. Yeah, how would you respond to that?
Well, I suppose for the child in pain and the mother killing them, that's not the child choosing how they respond to their suffering, that's someone else doing it for them. And in general, we oppose that. In terms of someone who 100% believes suicide is their only option, I'd say a couple of things. Firstly, the development of more and varied tools like medical interventions, like new forms of therapy, is probably a very good way to help them. If they have a terminal degenerative illness, I personally believe that such a person should be able to choose voluntary euthanasia. Members of my family have done that, and it spared them a great deal of indignity and pain because they were able to do that. In that case, I think that, yeah, they do have the capacity to make that choice for themselves, because ultimately they are the only ones that know their own mind. They are the only ones that understand themselves to the degree necessary to make that decision. Now, if a mental illness has robbed them of their ability to make rational decisions, then perhaps other people should intervene in those circumstances, restore them to a rational place where they can make rational decisions for themselves. And probably in that circumstance, they will see that there is, in fact, options available to them that can alleviate their pain. So that would probably be how I'd respond to those circumstances. Did you have anything?
Oh, no, I think that's a perfect response.
Cool.
Our next question is for both teams. This is from Rain.
I think it was my second one, which was oh man, I forgot. I think it was something along the lines of, does the effectiveness of a framework, or like how useful it is that related to its truth claim then? So like obviously if a framework helps someone, go for it. I think that's great. But if we're talking about truth and if something is valid, like how do you connect those two things? If you get my point, I'm not too sure how I phrased that already.
Right, so if I understand this question correctly, you're asking if something effective, is that necessarily true? Not really, right? There's not exactly a true causation between something that's effective and something that's true. But I do think that something that's true is more likely to be effective and vice versa, because in order to address something, in this case, suffering, you need to understand it first. If you don't have an adequate understanding of something, you can't really effectively address it. And I think secularism provides a good understanding of it. And therefore, the solutions that we provide are also, in a large sense, quite effective. It is because we understand that individuals are varied. It is because we understand that the world responds in a way that is, ultimately coming from sides of nature, and it depends on individual needs, that we are able to essentially cater our solutions according to individual needs. And I don't quite think that Christianity is doing a very good job in that, because for them, they have a faith first. For them, you have to believe in Christianity in order to believe it is a superior solution, it is a superior understanding for all other frameworks. And I think that's the part where our side provides a better explanation. Is there anything you want to say, Andrew?
I mean, well, first, the topic is the better explanation, not the true. Like, truth is one metric by which that explanation might be better, but our capacity to alleviate suffering with that explanation is probably also a reason why that explanation might be better. Now, I happen to think that a secular approach to the universe is true, but you don't need to have that approach in order to believe that a secular approach to suffering is the better response. You can believe in perhaps the metaphysics of Islam or the metaphysics of Hinduism or the metaphysics of Buddhism, but nevertheless, be a secularist. Believe that the ways that you should respond to and understand the world are secular because it comes from the variety of different ways that we interact with one another and does not impose upon other people the truth of those things. I think that if we just wanted to ask, well, what is the true cause of suffering? Well, then we find anyone who is suffering, we ask what happened, and we say, well, that thing that happened, that was what caused the suffering. This is the true explanation. But it's not the interesting way that we find out which of these explanations is better.
Thank you for your question, Rain. I think Christianity, to the part that you asked about truth, Christianity is quite clear that it does put forward truth claims exclusively, and that is not something that secularism has claimed tonight, and that is, we believe that that is one of Christianity's strengths and one of secularism's weaknesses. So in claiming exclusive truth to the Christian narrative and all of its elements that we discussed, creation of the world, salvation through Jesus, and the hope of a restored creation to come, the approach to suffering and the explanation of why it exists and then how we respond to it and the effectiveness of that response is all embedded within this worldview that does claim exclusive truth. And what we've tried to put forward tonight is a case that this explanation for how to evaluate and respond to suffering as embedded within a broader, comprehensive narrative of how the world works is much more satisfying and is much more logical. And I think I used the metrics logically, emotionally, and practically. It makes sense more than secularism does. And part of that, I think, is the essential truth claims that Christianity makes. And if you look to the evidence of the fact that Jesus walked the earth, the fact that Jesus died on the cross, and then the fact that he rose to life again, I think this is where the core of the truth of Christianity is tested, and this is where it proves to be secure. Did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it is worth noting, though, that a truth is also applied by people, and people are flawed. And so whether the effectiveness necessarily means something is true is like slightly more iffy. Yeah, I should note as well that the notion that you have to believe all of Christianity's truths for you to get any effectiveness is not exclusive to Christianity's side either. You also have to believe on secularism's side the truths that they want to posit as well. You have to believe that breadth is the best solution. So I don't think that's an exclusive claim.
Cool, thank you. This next question is for MCU again, and it's asked by Kathy. And Kathy asks, how does Christianity account for the different interpretations of the Bible if it tells you what is good and what is bad?
Yeah, so I do think obviously there are different interpretations of the Bible, but importantly, Christians hold to the same fundamental truths. The first, that Jesus is God, is who he says he is. He lived, died, and rose again, and therefore we should be looking to model how we live off of Jesus. And so whilst there might be different interpretations there, I think that there is just enough shared belief in the fundamentals of Christianity to be able to, derive at least some pretty solid form of objectively what is right and wrong from that framework.
Our next question is for MPS. If two people who believe in secularism come to a different conclusion on a moral problem because they have different levels of empathy or different interpretations, how can they come to a consensus about the situation?
Pistols at dawn? No, I mean, they do exactly what we're doing now. They have a discussion, they have a debate about it. They try and listen to one another as carefully as they can. They try and come to some common understanding. If ultimately they can't come to some common understanding, well, then you take a vote. And you work it out from the room, and you try and create the best compromise that you can, because as secularists, we try and think that we don't have an objective sort of ownership of truth. We take a position that maybe that other person is right. I can't discount that. And so I shouldn't just outright reject them as being completely and totally wrong. And that's very, very powerful for creating consensus and creating empathy. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I think it's precisely because we have this, understanding that, perhaps we maybe are not right, that it is better to accept our approach, because the Christians, they believe in objective claim oftentimes. And this leads to actually disagreements, unlike what Salome has claimed, right? Just, if you ever go to Oxford University, you might find there's a cross in the streets. That's where 3 bishops were burned alive at the stake for not disagreeing that God exists or Jesus is true, but just because they believe in the wrong denomination. They believe that Jesus was perceived from God and not the God and the Holy Spirit. So yeah, they were just burned at the stake. They want to meet their maker. So really, I fail to see how this, is a better approach to, to disagreements, right? Secularists don't believe burning people at stakes. We believe we should have a debate. We should have an understanding and try to reach an understanding. And when the other party doesn't agree with us, then it's fine. We accept it. So, but we don't try to, obliterate the other party because we disagree with them. And I think that's why our approach is generally better.
Okay. This next question is for both sides. And if you guys could answer individually, that'd be good as well. And the question is, what is the hope that you believe in individually? What is the hope that you believe in?
I can go first. I love this question. Whoever asked this, thank you. Personally, the hope that I believe in is the hope that Christianity offers. And we've outlined this a little bit, but I believe that I am made in the image of God and that I therefore have human dignity and I am loved. I believe that oftentimes I am what the Bible would call sinful. I am prideful. I want to be in charge of my own life rather than letting God, who created me and loves me and knows me better than I know myself, rather than letting him be the God of my life. I want to be my own God. And when this happens, I am given grace. I am given mercy by God because Jesus died on the cross to save me from that life of death and separation from God. And this means that I look forward to a day when creation will be restored, when I will get to spend eternity in heaven with God, where there is no more suffering, no more pain. And this is part of what gets me through every day, this hope that I can look to what I believe in and know that there is something better, that ultimately justice will be served, we will live in a perfect world again, and that there is something better than the suffering we experience in this life.
I'm going to add some more hope to that, which is that not only is there a hope beyond simply dying at the end of your life and that being the one way that there is a complete end to suffering, additionally, there's a belief that we have a God that knows, loves, and cares for us. And so even if in the fact that we are limited beings, I can't see the future, I can't know what's best for me, I know that there is a God who does and who works to include things in his plan for me to flourish and for me because he loves me, and he loves me enough that he sent his son to die. So there's a current hope and there's also a hope for the future at the same time.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Honestly, I'm a bit perplexed at this question because some parts of me don't really feel like I understand what I really hope for. But I do think that in my life, I don't really need some supernatural figure to love me. I have to make my life hopeful. I have my parents who love me. I have my friends who give me support when I need them. And I feel very happy when I respond with my own love and support as well. So that's hope I have now, is to, receive love and support from those who are close to me, and then give those support and love back when they are needed. As for the future, I can't claim that I know an afterlife. What lies beyond death does horrify me. But I also do think that death gives us a meaning in this life as well. It's because we understand that what we have here is very possibly finite, that we'll try to do the best that we can. So what I hope for in the afterlife is that I can hope that it is a chance for me to do as much good as I can in this life, so that when I do something in the future perish, I can look back and say, I am happy with what I've done in my life. That's the statement that I hope I can make when I die.
So I derive a lot of my hope from my relationship with literature and authors like Milton or Shakespeare. It is a source of constant astonishment to me that someone who lived 400 years ago, never knew me, lived in a culture in many ways very different from mine, can nevertheless put together a string of words that resonate so well with me that they'll change my life. It confirms for me that there is something universal in the human experience, in spite of all differences. And even when I read 1001 Arabian Nights or Journey to the West from Chinese literature, there is that same common thread of humanity that allows us, even though we might have enormous differences to one another, to nevertheless find commonality, to nevertheless be able to communicate with one another, to find truths in one another's words. And if they have the capacity to do that, then I believe everyone in this room has the capacity to do that, to reach out and understand others, to come to agreements, to come to consensuses. And that gives me hope that the world can be better.
So this next question is for MCU, and it's asked by Amadeus, if they're in the crowd. Yep.
I just find it extremely ironic and obscene, to be honest, that you brought up the Holocaust situation, and you've seen it as a bad situation, while in the same breath you justify the genocide of the Canaanites. By your God's logic and by your Bible's logic, how do you justify that?
In one sense, I was hesitant to bring up that example because I know it is such an extreme one. But the reason that I did was to demonstrate the point that Christianity has a moral basis for saying that killing another human being is wrong, and wiping out or attempting to wipe out an entire civilization of people is wrong. And that is because humans have inherent dignity. We are made in the image of God. Our lives belong to God. They are not for ours to take. They are not for us to take. And that is the moral basis that Christianity provides to judge what is just and what is not, and what is good and what is bad. And secularism does not provide any moral basis on which to say that what happened in the Holocaust was wrong. Though it doesn't directly endorse it, it provides no framework on which to say that that was bad, because everybody is allowed to believe in their own morality that they want to believe in, and think that what they desire to do based on their own humanity is justified, because there's nothing telling them that they can't. To respond to the second part of the question, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I do think, again, that importantly, the way that God responds to suffering is, again, not something that we can necessarily think that we will fully understand, in the sense that, again, we are limited beings. I cannot foresee the consequences that my action will have. But I know that if God, as an unlimited being who can see the consequences now and forevermore, decides that something is just, that is a far better standard of justice than I can provide because I am flawed. I cannot evaluate justice without my own subjective cultural experiences, norms, etc. And so, whilst I may not know exactly why God chooses to commit or chooses to act in a way that might seem unjust to us, I think we have a fairly good character reference that he is not a tyrannical God. And also, we as individuals aren't actually in the position to say that we are God and that we can evaluate his actions as unjust or just, because that is not a standard that is created by humans in and of itself.
Can't we make the same argument for Hitler, for telling the Jews that they brought their punishment upon themselves?
Is Hitler God?
Do we want to just keep these written down and then we can carry these out afterwards? Thank you so much for your questions. And they are really good ones to be thinking about. I would just like to be able to move on at this point in the night. We're going to have one final question. So there's over 100 that we haven't answered, and would encourage you to keep thinking about them. I know both sets of debaters will be more than happy to keep talking about them later into the night. The one that we want to finish with is a bit of a classic that we hope will kind of bring back the spirit of the debate that we're here for. What is the best argument that you think you've heard from the other team tonight? MCU, would you like to start off?
There's a lot of compelling argument. Okay. Like, as in, I do think that there are points of discussion on both sides that are really valid that should be discussed further. But yeah, I think that, the idea around human empathy and like why that exists and the ability that gives humans to, I guess, participate with others or interact with others in a way that is empathetic and kind, was a super interesting point that I wish that we could unpack more.
Are we all giving answers? Okay, cool. Mine's similar to that. I think I like the idea, and I think it resonates with both worldviews, that there is a universal humanity to all of us. And you talked a lot about this, Andrew, in your what gives you hope. I think the idea that we can identify throughout time and space. This is a humanity that transcends the social context that we each live in. And I think that is something that is really beautiful. I loved that point.
Thank you, firstly. It was a lovely recognition. And, I hope my answer could be as gracious as yours. For I think this might be a minor point I brought by you guys, but I do agree that you guys, when you said that Christianity is a good safety net for lots of people, right? It's a good ground. Like if you're confused sometimes about what's best for you, then Christianity oftentimes do provide a pretty good explanation for suffering. And I've seen lots of people, when they convert to Christianity, became better people. So I think it is good. And certainly Christianity is a lot better than the myriad of other ethical systems out there, which perhaps secularism in some sense condones. So in this sense, I do believe that Christianity does have a good safety net, and it is a pretty powerful argument. I would still agree that secularism gives better liberties. Sorry for my pettiness, but honestly, it's a pretty good argument from your side. So thank you for raising that up.
So I'm like super interested in theology because it impacts so much of world literature. And one of the things that I think keeps coming up and was brought up by the speakers tonight is that in religion, people find a kind of narrative sense to the world that they very often don't find otherwise. The idea that there is some sort of aesthetic sense to the world, there is a symmetry to it and a beauty to it and a harmony to it. And whilst for me, I can't get around the truth claims, I think what converts a lot of people and what drives them to find something in Christianity is that desire for something deeper. And it was sort of the argument that I was most frightened of coming into this, which is why we constructed the speeches trying to answer that as best we can. But I think that that is the thing that I find most compelling about religious stories and about religious response to the world.
I want to give both our debaters a big hand.
I want to say big thank you to the debaters, but also thank you to you guys for your questions. We really appreciate you guys thinking and engaging in this topic. And like we said before, both clubs think it's a big topic and we really want you to engage in it. Now, if you've been sitting there and your question wasn't answered and you've worked up an appetite for staying around till 1 a.m. tonight and talking to people, I encourage you, do that. Wait till Monash Security comes. And we do quickly want to hear from the clubs who put on this debate. So I want to welcome up our President Gracie to come up and say a few things from Monash.
Oh, there's so many people here. Hi, I'm Gracie. I am the Monash CU president, and I'm going to tell you the who, what, when, where, and why of Christian Union. So, who should get involved at Christian Union? I would say that Christian Union is there for both the seekers and the sold. What do I mean? If you have questions about Christianity, about Jesus and about the Bible, then CU is for you because it is a great place for you to get your questions answered. And if you are sold on Jesus, if you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior, then CU is also for you because it offers great fellowship and it also equips you and encourages you to live out your faith actively on campus. Now I'm going to knock off, what, when, and where in one go. 3 birds, 1 stone. So the what of Christian Union. What do we do? How do you get involved? So if you ask anybody from CU, they'll tell you we do like an insane amount of stuff. But I think the top ways that you can get involved, first one would be CU Hub. So CU Hub happens Tuesday nights during semester at 6 p.m. What do we do? Well, we sing a couple worship songs together. We pray together. We read a Bible passage. And then we listen to a talk about that Bible passage. And then afterwards, we eat dinner together and we just talk and chat. Now, I would recommend CU Hub to you, whether you're Christian or not. If you want to come along and you just want to sit back and you want to see what it's all about, because that's all you'll do for most of the night. You can just sit there and observe. But I will say CU Hub is a big crowd. So if big crowds are not your vibe, but you're still interested in investigating Jesus, you want answers, questions, you have a question that you just cannot get off your mind about who is this Jesus, then we have a great resource, Uncover John, which is an eyewitness account of Jesus's life. And we have people that are willing to sit down and read that book with you. That's just one-on-one, no observing eyes, no judgment. And we actually have some books available for you afterwards as well. So that's, I hope that answers the what, when, and where. And you can also check out our socials if you need any other information. Monash Clayton Christian Union is our Instagram handle. It's so long. And then monashcu.com is our website. Very easy to remember. And that, of course, brings me to the why. Why do we have Christian Union? Yeah, there's a picnic tomorrow. Yeah, actually, yeah, I should probably talk about the picnic. Yeah, I'm sure you still have burning questions today. Deep thoughts. My brain is pretty mushy right now, but I know that tonight I'm not going to be able to sleep. I've got a lot of thoughts still cooking. If you still have questions about anything that you feel wasn't answered up the front here, especially from the Monash CU side, we're having a picnic tomorrow at, I believe it's at the Menzies lawn at 12 till 2. Come along for however long you'd like to get your questions answered. Another why. Why get involved at CU? Well, the answer to the why for us at CU is simply Jesus. And I believe that life gets insanely busy after uni life. That seems to be the consensus with all of my friends who have already graduated. You get bogged down in full-time work, or maybe starting a family, or maybe starting that entrepreneurial business scheme you've been cooking up for the last few years. Life gets in the way. And so I would take the time at uni to figure out what your life is all about. And so come along to see you to find out who your life could be all about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gracie. Yeah, I've had many late nights, stay up till the morning chatting with Christians, disagreeing with Christians. And if you're interested in a bunch of things, philosophy, if you have questions but you don't know how to ask your questions, so you need to talk to someone to figure out how to ask the questions, maybe a philosopher can help you with that. And to talk more about that, I'd love to invite Frank to give us a bit of a spiel.
Okay, can you all hear me? Thank you, Kai, and thank you, Gracie, and thank you to all the speakers and everybody else who organized this wonderful event. I wasn't personally involved in the organization of this, but I hope that you all found this to be as interesting as I did. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Frank. I'm the incoming president of Monash Philosophy Society. In fact, we have 3 generations of presidents here. We have Raheel, the outgoing president, and before Raheel, there was also James. So three presidents. And I believe our flagship event, which happens usually every Thursday at Whole Foods, every Thursday evening, is Philosophy and Tea. And it's a very different environment to a debate setting where we might have this dual binary system, for instance. But it's very different to that. It's more like a multi-body, more complex system where everybody in the room gets to have a say. And we ask interesting questions. Like one question might be, if the universe was a cake, what flavor would it be? And there can be many different other topics in addition to that. And we have many other types of events as well, guest speakers and panels not dissimilar to this. And we have movie nights, and in fact, next Wednesday we have a collaboration with Effective Altruism, which will also be at Whole Foods at 5:30 p.m. So you can check that out if you like. And I think I don't have a clicker to change the slide, but the next slide is yes. So if you want to join us, we have a link to become a member, and you can also check out our socials. So we have Facebook and Instagram as well. And yeah, that's it from me.
Can I say something quickly? Hi, I'm just stealing the spotlight because I promised some friends I would. Salome, Siming, and myself are all people who regularly go to the Monash Debate Society. Thanks, guys. If you are interested in the skills of debating, if you're interested in how to listen, how to come up with responses, how to have a consistent case line, how to publicly speak and not, stumble all over your words, the Debate Society is the place for you. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6 p.m. in the LTB. We look forward to seeing you there, Bella. And yeah, I'd also like to give a massive thank you to all the organizers, the moderator, our MCs. This has been a wonderful event.
All right. So thank you so much, guys, for coming. Usually at the end of the debates, we announce the winner, right? So I'd like to say unequivocally that the winner for today's debate will not be decided. And as we outlined at the beginning, there's a very important reason for that, because this debate isn't about pointing at people and say, you're wrong, I'm smart. This debate is an opportunity and a starting point for more discussions, for more opportunities, for more questions burning your mind that you just stay up till 5 a.m. talking about. So yeah, looking forward to seeing you in those conversations.
Yeah, I want to reiterate, you all have brains. Great, use them. We want you guys to think about these questions. And I hope that afterwards, with the tea and coffee in the foyer, you can enjoy some conversations with people. Reminder again that tomorrow there is the picnic. If tonight's not long enough for you and you want to come back again tomorrow, at 12 o'clock, Menzies Lawn. If it's raining, we'll meet in the foyer of C1.
Amazing. So snacks today, snacks tomorrow, conversations all the time. This is me and Mana signing off. Thanks for being here, guys.